project, the case being that this Congress, which is an open Congress for open participation,
are excluding somebody as such, but I am 99% sure that we will continue only funding networks, that we will not fund a local project. It will have to be a network of local projects. This is already important from a legal and political perspective, because this means that we will never be accused of being in breach of the principle of subsidiarity. If we only fund transnational European networks, then it's obvious that we do something that member states and municipalities are not doing already.
Really an active role in several challenges that the European Union is somehow dealing with. For example, European citizenship, European awareness, social inclusion. And I have in my mind, for example, programs as Youth in Action, Europe for Citizens, Green Exchange. Do you think that the sport is enough used, or do you think it's possible to use sport in a wide way, or in more way that it's actually used? Or yeah, this is what
that's a very good question. That's what we ask ourselves every day, because we have been relying for a long time on so-called mainstreaming. Now, you are raising the question here, what sport can do for Europe. We have been trying for a long time, when we didn't have any money, to see what EU programs, existing ones, can do for sport. We know at the moment that there are, on average, about 5 projects per year that are funded from the public health program. You also know that it's impossible to get funding from citizenship and from youth. Whether that will be more in the future, I don't know, but we will certainly continue the awareness raising work vis-à-vis our colleagues, to the effect that sport can lift many of the challenges that they have identified in the programs.
You may be standing continuously, Jacob, because Jens has another question.
Yeah, I'm Jens Andersen from Comision. Jacob, I would like to ask you, what is the likeliness that the Commission will take up an issue as governance in sport and sort of do an effort in raising the standards of governance? I'm asking because one reasoning for doing so is that a lot of money is actually used irrationally and misused, not exactly EU money necessarily, but in the whole economy of sport, by irrational decisions, biased decisions taken by international sports federations, and most of them living in Switzerland, of course, a little bit outside the EU. But I think it could be, I think it could be of broad general European interest to ensure that the sport movement as a whole works in a way that can actually sustain and support the goals that the European Union sees for sport and vice versa.
That is a very good question. And I'll not say, no, if I tried to give a simple answer, then you would know automatically that I was lying. What is the likeliness? Well, when the Commission prepares something, of course, there are different philosophers that flow into the work. And you would probably see the influence of both different philosophers. I think on the whole that the European Union is less likely to give in to certain types of pressure than national sport ministers are, for the simple fact that we cannot host the Olympics, and there are no other benefits that we can get, and there is no EU team. At the same time, it's obvious that there is a balancing exercise to do every time there are rules and every time there are calls for flexibility. And you know about the discussion on specificity, which is as old as the involvement of the EU in the field of sport, if not older. On specificity, it is a fact that specificity is now mentioned in the treaty. At the same time, one should also underline that this article is not a binding article. So we have a reference to specificity, but not an article that says exactly what we have to do in relation to specificity, which I think, from the point of view of the Commission, would confirm our approach that we deal with specificity issues on a case-by-case basis, rather than giving a blanket exception when the white paper on sport was published, some organizations were rather indicated that the white paper was not used as a good opportunity to grant such a blanket exception. It was not granted, and Jens, you will certainly remember that there were even some statements that were published a few days before the white paper was published, which showed that those who had written those statements must have had an advance copy. They shouldn't have had. But that was off the record, but Jens knows it anyway. I think you can imagine, you can expect governance issues to take some place, maybe even in a program. There could even be some financing for governance projects to help organizations build new capacities. Of course, some organizations already have resources, and that makes it a bit more difficult to use that kind of instrument in that connection. I would not claim that I have a simple reply to your question, but as you know, there are competing schools of thought, and the outcome reflects that there are competing schools of thought.
Thank you for that, Jakob. I don't know what that means. It was a good long answer.
Well, I don't know whether Jens has got one, but there are always surprises. Now look at the US Supreme Court, American Needle, 2010. The National Football League had taken a number of rulings to the Supreme Court, rulings which broadly did not go against the National Football League in state courts, but the National Football League hoped that existing partial exemptions from the Sherman Act could now, at a time where the majority of Supreme Court judges are appointees of the Bush administration and conservatives, they hoped that they would then be very attentive to the interests of sport business. And they were rejected. I'm not a specialist on the issue, but I've heard one US academic saying that he thinks that it's actually a setback. So you can never be sure. And in this case, the Supreme Court took some people by surprise, I think, because the Football League thought that now they would, once and for all, get an exemption from all the articles of the Sherman Act. And they didn't get it. So it's a sustained effort that's necessary on both sides of the Atlantic. And personally, I'm not somebody who believes very strongly in specificity, but as you know, there are different ideas that are competing with each other.
Thank you very much. I think this is also showing some of the breadth of the discussions here, that we can take ourselves from anywhere in a local community, and the question if there should be physiotherapists involved in specific actions, to whether or not the National Football League in the US in fact should have exemptions from general rulings. So I think it's quite interesting for us to see this diversity. If you can promise me one simple question and a simple answer, or at least a short one. I will allow the last one.
Okay, it would be as short as simple as the question asked.
Thank you.
Just a very, very short comment to sort of decipher the encryption of Jacob's words. I'm not going to tell Jacob what he said, because he knows. But I would say I know a parallel situation in the EU that perhaps could be what Jacob refers to. That, as you know, the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, and FIFA have reacted very, very strongly against any kind of EU involvement in sport, especially if it was not. They of course appreciate EU giving money, but no questions asked.
Yeah, that's generally appreciated.
That's generally appreciated. Yes, and I will not exempt us, the rest of us, also for being interested in that part. But and I will just mention it here because it should be something that Sport for All organizations also take into account when debating the relevance of having a European sports policy effort. That there are actually very strong forces that are against such an effort. And I think having the backing of the EU system generally is more an advantage for Sport for All organizations than a disadvantage. So, and that is the kind of struggle that Jacob was perhaps referring to.
Okay, we're looking into some questions here. Thank you once again to Jakob. Let's give him a hand.